So we are going to start some theory on both Node and Express. If you want to follow along, whether you're online or here in person, you can kind of see there's under this heading, building web apps with Node and Express. There's a reading assignment. And if you remember, we don't have a textbook, but we do have reading. That doesn't mean that there's not reading. There's a reading assignment, and then there's a lecture outline. I'm going to be going off of this lecture outline. These are not traditional PowerPoints in that I don't like to read off a slide anyways. Okay, so the lecture outlines here are going to be what I'm using to kind of give me some bullet points and talking points, and then I'm just going to talk to those points. Okay, so go ahead and open up, if you want to, the lecture outline for Node and the lecture outline for Express. And then the reading assignment, these are both documents that I would recommend reading. Now, these are not short reading assignments, okay? If you look at the Node reading, this is 37 pages, okay? And it's not short, okay? It's not like double spaced or anything, but this reading assignment ultimately will take you deeper, okay? I can't teach everything in a 1 hour lecture, nor would you remember it anyways. So this is a supplement to the lecture, okay? The reading assignments are supplements to the lecture, and I do ask that you read them. In the future, you could probably guess that you'll have some testing going on from these reading assignments, right? Just like you have a test that goes on from a textbook, it's going to be the same kind of thing. And again, my hope is that I can kind of review this with you so that you feel confident in the test, right? I'm not just going to talk about it once and then test you over it. My hope is that I can iterate over it and actually get you guys really comfortable with Node and Express for these tests. Okay, so just this week, how you're testing it over objects, in the future, it's safe to say we'll have a written test over Node or a written test over Express or over both. And that's going to be, part of it. Obviously, the testing is only a piece of the grade, right? Obviously, we've got the hands-on. Okay. Man, I tell you what, kind of starting with the Node lecture outline. So if you guys want to open that up. I can't tell you, to understand Node, really Node begins with this first bullet point. Right, we're studying MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. Node is really the foundation of it. It's the last letter in MERN, but this is the foundation of this course. Everything that we're going to do is built on top of Node. And so you guys might remember this a little bit from last week. JavaScript runs in the browser. Okay, that's where JavaScript was born. JavaScript was born in 1995, if you remember, and it was born to run in the browser. Node allows you to run JavaScript. If you look at this bullet, it is a runtime environment. Elsewhere, besides the browser, right? And if you look at the labs that you guys did last week, where were you guys running JavaScript? You guys were running JavaScript using Node in the terminal window, right? You guys were running JavaScript. That terminal window was not... That was built into Visual Studio Code. That was not, obviously, the browser. So we're running JavaScript somewhere else. So you can see Node allows you to run JavaScript outside the browser. Where does it end up running, right? If we're not going to run it in the browser, where typically is this going to run?
Terminal.
Okay, so we're going to run it in the terminal. PowerShell, command line, terminal, all kind of synonyms. Right? But I'm looking for a different word here. Yeah. On a server. Thank you. Yeah. So what does it mean when we say JavaScript runs in the browser? That means that it runs on the client. The client being your laptop, the client being your desktop, your tablet, your cell phone. These are clients. I'm going to define the word server. I remember sitting in your chair and going, what is a server? I don't even, I remember being a student going, I don't know what a server is. How is a server different than a client? You guys know what a client is: desktops, laptops, cell phones. So real basic, what is a server? How would you define it? Okay, so something that your application runs on, that's one way. That is true. That is a true statement. How else might you define it?
All the clients connect to the server.
Okay, the clients connect to the server. That is also a true statement. What else?
Send info to it, and then the server sends a promise back or a payload.
Okay, so the client kind of communicates with the server, and the server sends something back. Okay, when I think of a server in my head, a server hosts a resource. It's a real vague definition, but a server hosts a resource. Okay, now it was like a kind of a brain it screwed with my brain to think that my laptop can be a server. But that is a true statement. Client server is a relationship. Client server is just a relationship. Any computer can be a server because it's just a relationship. The server has something, the client wants something. The client says, "Can I have it?" The server responds with the something. Whatever that something is. Client server is a relationship. The server has the thing that the client wants. The server says, "Can I have it?" The server says, "Here you go." Okay? So foundationally, a server hosts a resource. Now, what kind of resource can it host? It depends on the kind of server. Let me tell you, I've taken server classes. I've studied server product lines, and a server can host a lot of resources. There's all sorts of things that a server can have that a client can want. Okay, to give you an example, let me list a few, right? You might have heard of a file server. Well, a file server kind of hosts the files, right? If you've ever had an M drive at work or a G drive or whatever, or if you think of Google Drive, ultimately there's a server somewhere that hosts your files. So file server is a kind of server. Okay, the client wants the file, the server has the file, and it sends it. Okay, a web server, what Henry was saying, a web server hosts a website typically, right? The client wants the website, the server says, "Here you go." It sends the HTML down to the client. Yeah.
Sorry, so server and database, they're different, right?
Yeah, so a database server is a kind of server.
Okay, so with the server, is it safe to say the server is like the middleman that connects the application to the database, or could it be like that?
Yeah, so let's yes. So oftentimes you talk about tiers, and there's like a 3-tier architecture where there's a client, an application server, and a separate database server. Okay, I think that's what you were kind of referencing. The application server connects to the database server. So let's just talk about the database server. The database server, and we're going to talk about databases next week. Well, that's where the data is housed. That's where the data is stored. Okay? So all of this to say that Node is going to allow us to run JavaScript on the server, which is where we're basically going to build our application code to host from an application server. Okay, so our application in the old days, you would like drop in a CD and install the software on the computer. Okay, that would be where the application code existed on your computer's hard drive. Okay, but that's not going to be the case anymore. Now we're going to have our application code hosted on a server. And the client is going to access the application code through Chrome, okay, to run the application. So it's a weird thing to think that, okay, when what we're about to do here is we're about to build a web server. Today, you're going to watch me install a web server, and it's going to be on my desktop. Okay, but yes, a desktop can be a server. A laptop can be a server. Okay, because it's just really a relationship between computers. One has something, the other one wants something, and there you go. So we will use Node to build a web server. Yes? Yeah, so at the end of the day, we're gonna build a web server, and we're going to take that application code and we're going to put it on Google's cloud, G Cloud, and then we can access it. It'll be on the internet. So what's that? No, it will not be an exe file. Yeah. You will use a web browser on any computer, and that will be able to access your application code. And that's a good question, because like when you install it on your local computer, it's an exe file typically, right? If you're on a Windows PC, that's typically how it looks. The last thing I'll say about like what is a server, traditionally you see, like in a server farm, you see blade servers, right? So computers, they just take different form factors. A cell phone, this is a form factor of a computer, right? Same as your desktop, same as your tablet. These are different form factors, okay? A server traditionally looks a little bit differently. Traditionally, like if I search for blade servers, typically, they look something like this. Like it looks kind of intimidating. And yeah, they can be intimidating to look at, but at the end of the day, they're just computers. They're processors and hard drives. Traditionally, a server computer, it might have your desktop has one processor. A server, one of these, are kind of like a supercomputer. They tend to have more hardware, like maybe 4 processors or 8 processors or 16 processors, and like umpteen terabytes of storage or petabytes or whatever. 3,000 gigs of RAM or whatever. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Okay. Okay, so Node allows us to build a web server. Okay, by the way, you guys, last semester, you installed Visual Studio Code, and what web server did you use last semester?
Was it NoSQL?
Live server. Remember live server?
Yeah, we used
So someone else.
NPM stuff.
I don't know if you use NPM. Maybe, yeah, you did.
NPM install.
You did, and that's where we're going. That's where we're going. But I just want you to think, you guys wrote HTML last semester, and you would right-click the HTML file and open with live server.
Yeah.
Remember that?
No, it's
That was a web server. Okay, that was a web server that you installed as an extension, so that you can run a web page on your local host. Okay, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to run a web server on localhost, on your computer. Localhost is your computer. Okay, now, web servers, if you want, like for example, a file server, servers, because a server can host so many kinds of files. Okay, what language do web servers like send and receive requests in? What what protocol, I should ask, what protocol do web servers send and receive requests? What protocol?
HTTP.
Thank you. HTTP. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, so we are going to code a web server using Node, and then the way that our client and our server are going to communicate back and forth is with this internet protocol called HTTP. HTTP kind of was one of those foundational protocols of the internet, and it allowed us to send information from client and server, from a web server and a web client, back and forth. Be it, you could send web pages, but you could send other information too, right? You can send, again, whatever resource you're trying to send over HTTP. There's certain resources you can send over HTTP, and I imagine there's a list of resources that you can't send over HTTP. Okay? Okay. So, lastly, a couple other notes on Node. Let's spin up a Node server. Let's spin up a Node server real quick, and I have this in my notes, but I just want to kind of Node demo. Okay, so I'm going to open up this folder, right click. By the way, if you don't have this open with code in your right click options, that's off the installer. That's a really nice feature, right? So I'm going to go ahead and install or run index.mjs. You guys remember this from last semester. And right on the Node, let me see here. Okay, right here on the Node.js.org, you see the JavaScript code that's needed to create a server. Right? So just using Node, we're going to create this server. I'm just going to copy this to the clipboard. You guys are free to run along. And I'm just going to paste it right in here. Now, notice it's using this import syntax. Now, they recommend naming the file server.mjs. I named it index.mjs. But you could take a look here. Remember MJS? Someone remind me what MJS? Modular JavaScript, right? That's the newer module system that came out in whatever 2017, something like that. If you don't see imports up here, what are the other options? What's the other way of bringing things in? Yes, require. Okay, so when you see an MJS, that's the newer syntax. You're going to see these imports. You guys following me here? If you see require is still everywhere. A lot of developers still use require. So you're going to see it out, quote unquote, in the wild. I prefer imports in this class because it's the newer syntax. Okay, so I'm going to use imports, but you're probably still going to see require, and you're going to have to convert between the syntaxes there a little bit. Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, definitely zoom in. What am I doing here? Okay. So here on line 2, we're bringing in a method. So we're importing a method. That method is called createServer, and this is built into Node, right? We're bringing in a method called createServer. It's in Node. You can see line 4 creates this variable by calling the server, and it sets this content type to just basically text. This is basically saying, hey, this is going to be a text. And it responds, this right here, rec and res. You're going to see a lot of this pretty soon. Okay? Remember what we're doing is creating an HTTP server. And client and server, they communicate back and forth using HTTP. These are objects. Remember, we're going to study JavaScript objects. Both rec and res are objects.
What did you type all of that out?
No, I just copied and paste. I just copied and pasted.
From where?
From the homepage on Node.JS .org, right here. But just explaining this, these objects represent the request object. So REQ represents the request from the client. So REQ represents the request from the client, and RES represents response. Request response. Okay, you're going to see a lot of this as we start building our own web servers, rec and res. Okay, that's the convention to name those variables. So we're basically saying response going back to the client is a little bit of text, and it says hello world. And then we call this server listen method. This is a port number, port 3000, IP address 127.0.0.1. That's called the loopback address. And it logs listening on port 3000, IP address 120.27.1. Okay, so you can create a web server using Node. By the way, we won't do this very much, okay, because there's a better process. But you can straight use Node to create a web server. And if I run this, I'm going to say Node, I said index MJS, and you can kind of see listening on is I get a little console log. Now if I hold down control and I click, let me just copy this and throw it into the browser. So if I paste that, this IP address into my browser, okay, notice when I copy and paste my IP address and my port number, we just get hello world back. Okay, nothing crazy fancy here. It's hello world. It's hello world in Node, and now we've created a server. More specifically, we've created a web server. When you create a web server, you're communicating with HTTP. That is the protocol of the World Wide Web. Okay, a guy by the name of Tim Berners-Lee played a big role in creating HTTP. And if you remember HTTP, well, obviously the S there is for secure. You know, this is the basic protocol of the internet, and it basically says a client is a web browser, and they send a GET request, HTTP GET request, and the server responds with, basic request response. REQ is request, then the server sends back the response. Yes, sir?
Is it like kind of standard is the way to phrase it? But
Yeah.
Like, it's like an OK response code always going to be 200.
Yeah, so we're going to get into what you're talking about are status codes, HTTP status codes. And on a successful response, it is common to say 200. Okay, so these numbers here, everyone's seen like 404? Has everyone seen 404 not found? Right? That's like the most understood one because you try to navigate to something that doesn't exist and you get a response code of 404. There's a whole bunch of numbers for status codes. 200 typically means, hey, good status code, like yes it worked. But we're gonna dive deeper on all these status codes as well.
I have another question.
Please.
Are the servers like hard programmed to like accept like 200 through 299 is okay, or like is it?
It's a convention.
It's just
Yeah, it's like it's a practice. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so we've learned how to use Node to spin up a web server that's going to communicate with HTTP. Now, really early on, I want to kind of address this, and it's like, hey, Mr. G, normally I thought of HTTP like serving up web pages. And yeah, this is a web page, I guess. Is this a web page or is it just some text? HTTP://127.300. This isn't really a web page. This isn't HTML in the sense, like if you look here, there's no tags or anything like that. And so we're going to learn pretty quick that what we're creating here is a web server, and they can host, or they can provide access to web pages, HTML, but they can also provide access to other types of resources besides just HTML. So we'll dive into that a little bit more as we get into Express. But basically, we're going to learn that web servers yes, they can provide some front-end resources, but they can also provide access to some other resources besides HTML and CSS and images and things of that nature. All right, so that's spinning up a web server. And let me close all of this stuff because I got too many browser tabs open. Yes, please.
If I was to change something in like the response,
Yep.
I would be the only person that can see that.
Right now, yes, because I'm just running it on my local host. It's not until we would deploy it to the internet that other people could see it. Right, so that's a good question. Like everything we're doing is just on my own computer. And I'm going to be the only one that can see it until I deploy it to the internet. When I deploy it on the internet, I'm going to put it on a real server that's running 24/7. Right? My laptop, I can turn it off. Desktop, I can turn it off. When I put it on G Cloud, that's a server, that's a computer that's running 24/7, and you're paying for that. Now we have codes, we have access codes, we have credits, I should say. But yeah, that's when it'll be open to everybody. Yeah, not yet. Not yet. Soon we will. All right, so let me get back to my... I guess it's also worth noting, if I look at Node.JS, let's talk about like the versioning here. You get LTS, and I think the thing to understand right now about what LTS stands for is long-term support. And so these are the versions that are going to be supported by Node for a long time, a long period of time. In fact, I kind of had my cheater ChatGPT, and my last question was, how often, I said, what is the Node release pattern? Okay, so versions of Node, as you can kind of see here, there's a new major release. That first number is considered a major release every 6 months. And then there's a long-term support released once per year. And then they also have what's referred to as the current releases. And current releases, you can kind of see down here, like the LTS is version 20. But you can also see version 22 is a current. So these are new features that they kind of bring into the long-term support slowly. What happens when you implement a new feature? It might break some stuff, right? So when you have the current is version 22, but there's new features that might break some stuff. So they don't make it long-term support, LTS, until the current has been out there for a while. They fix the bugs. And you can also see here, the numbers represent somewhere in here it'll talk about even numbers versus odd numbers. Here it is. Even numbers are LTS candidates. Odd numbers, 15, 17, and current, are not going to go to LTS. Why do I bring this up? Do you think corporate America wants to support anything that's not going to be long-term support? No. Okay? So I'm just pointing this out that it's best to use LTS, long-term support, because that's what corporate America wants. Corporate America doesn't want a code base that's going to change on them in 6 months. Okay? So I recommend, even though, yeah, you could go download the latest features, and eventually 22 will transition into long-term support. Eventually 22 will transition into long-term support because it's an even number, right? But they're going to want to test it, work out the bugs, and eventually use LTS. So what's the takeaway here? Use long-term support. Don't use odd numbers. Don't use the current. Don't use the current features because there's bugs in there. That's my recommendation when it comes to your versioning of Node. All right, let me go back to my lecture notes. Okay, we've already done all this. Okay, asynchronous programming. Next week, and I haven't recorded this yet, but I'm going to do a video on asynchronous programming. There's basically 3 ways that you can write asynchronous programming, and this is another foundational JavaScript thing. Okay, so just how this week we're going to kind of cover objects in a little bit deeper theory. Next week, our topic is going to be on asynchronous programming. Okay, right now, I want you guys to realize, here's all I'm going to ask for you guys to kind of see this once. I want you guys to see this once so that you know what's coming about asynchronous programming. There's basically 3 ways that you can write asynchronous code in JavaScript. Does anyone know any one of the 3 ways?
The await syntax.
Okay, async await is actually the newest way. That is correct. So async await is one way to write asynchronous code. What else? You said it earlier.
Did I?
Yes, you did.
Like, oh, the promise.
You got it. Promises is another way. And the first way to write asynchronous code,
Is there something like a fetch? Or am I thinking of something?
yeah, fetch is a way of writing. It's a fetch API, is what that is. It's a library of code that uses promises, and so fetch API uses promises, is what it boils down to. But the first way is what's called callbacks. Okay. So right now, I just want to introduce these 3 ways of writing asynchronous code. And by the way, what is asynchronous code? Think of it as multitasking. Remember, JavaScript is single-threaded, but it can mimic multitasking. Okay, the way it can mimic multitasking is with asynchronous programming, and there are benefits there in certain environments where it takes a while to like make a database request, for example. It makes sense to kind of start the process and then go and do something else and then return to the process when it's done. Okay, so right now, I just want everyone to realize that Node is built on this foundation of asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming, there's 3 ways to write it, and you can view these as sequentially better. Okay, callbacks are the worst, promises are better, and then async await is best. Right now, I would say callbacks have this known problem. They call it callback hell. So that doesn't sound good. So you might have seen that. It's also called the Pyramid of Doom. This is probably a more politically correct Pyramid of Doom. That sounds scary. So callbacks, I'm familiar with callbacks, and if you've ever written anything in jQuery, that's where I was first exposed to callbacks. That's my experience. Promises were introduced in about 2015. And then async await is built on top of promises, so you should understand promises before you write async await. Is 2017. Async await is amazing because you can write code that looks synchronous but functions asynchronous. Okay, so async await, you guys are fortunate in the sense that we're just going to write async await most of the time. But you should understand promises because async await uses promises, so it's built on top of promises. And then just a little bit on callbacks because a little bit of a nightmare as all of this pyramid of doom would sound. Okay, you guys already know how to write console apps and using Node because that's what your homework was, right? So that's my Node lecture outline. It's a good time for a little, break here before we move on into Express. Again, we'll kind of revisit asynchronous programming next week, and what more do you say about Node before I send you on break? Node is the foundation that allows us to do anything in this class. Okay, even though we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Node. It's really just the foundation that allows us to do what we're going to do. So you should understand at a basic level, Node is a runtime environment that allows us to run JavaScript on the server, that allows us to have web servers written in JavaScript to build application software. All right, let's take 15 minutes. Right, to continue the conversation to Express, before we get into Express, we got this NPM, and you want to define NPM as Node Package Manager, but NPM is a few different things besides a package manager, so we'll get into it. So 3 parts of NPM, but again, I think of it as, as you're going to hear it called Node Package Manager. What are we looking at here? Other people are going to write JavaScript, and we've all heard the expression, why reinvent the wheel? And so let's just use the example that we just coded, which is here's a web server. And this is kind of like the basics of a web server, but there's a lot, performance of web servers, security of web servers. So if all of us went in and just started building a web server from scratch, some of us would build a more performant web server. Some of us would build a more secure web server. It's just the nature of if everyone's building their own things, some of the things are going to be better than others. And so people write JavaScript to build the web server, and then you could just use their code. You don't have to build your own web server. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so Node Package Manager, a package is just code that someone else wrote, right, that you can use. So Node Package Manager is just you bringing in other developers' code to use it. So let's take a look at Node Package Manager. And it's kind of 3 parts. Number 1, the website. So let's look at npmjs.com. Everyone go ahead and go to this on your computer if you want, or you could just watch my screen. This website is where you can learn about those packages. What packages are out there? When you find a package, is it a popular package? Where's the documentation? You can kind of look at their relied on by 17 million developers worldwide. Okay, that's a big number. The reason why I got tripped up on Node, notice they don't define it as Node Package Manager. Like if I do a Control F, NPM, I just think it's NPM anymore. I think you could think of it as the package manager, but I don't think it's actually defined as that technically. Regardless, like let's look up Express. Express is going to be what we're going to use. Express is a package. Someone else built a web server, and we are going to use Express. And so let's look up Express. Express, you could see it's been updated about 5 months ago. So number one, it's maintained, right? That's important to see, like the last time it's been updated. Is it a maintained package? 11 million weekly downloads. Okay, so it's a popular package. You get 11 million downloads every week. It's got some bugs. It's got some known issues. It's not free of bugs. And documentation. So you can, a lot of times this homepage gives you some information on how to get started using a package, but a lot of times there's a separate website. Right? So what is Express? Fast, unopinionated. Okay, well, I know what fast means. Unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node. So this is going to allow us to build a web server that's fast, minimalist, so on and so forth. We kind of already built a web server using just Node, but that's not realistic. Like most cases you're going to use someone else's code to help you spin up a web server. And that's what we're going to do here. We will use Express. Notice to install Express, you get the npm command. So number one, npm is a website of packages that you can download or just install. So the npm command line tool, npm iExpress is the command to do that. But I want to teach you another command before I do this. There's an npm init command. Like if I'm starting from scratch and I'm going to build a web server, npm init is typically where you start. Okay, this will create what's called a package.json file that is just like information about your code. Like this is, call it a metadata. You might have heard of metadata or a settings file. You could think of it as a metadata file or a settings file. Nonetheless, I'm going to run an npm init. And so what is the package name? Again, I'm going to, just use the default, which is Node Demo. That's my folder name. So if you hit enter, it'll assume the package name of Node Demo. By the way, if you're ever going to publish your own packages, this package JSON file will be viewed on the npmjs.com website. This is the version 1.0 of my file. My first web server will be the description. Entry point, notice index.js. I'm going to say index.mjs will be my entry point. I can leave my test command blank. Git repository, if you have a URL to a Git repository, you could put that in there. I don't. Keywords will help it be searched for on npm.js. This is just a dummy repo, dummy repository, right? Author is your name. License, MIT means open source. Other developers can use it. So I put MIT license. And it basically kind of gives you what the file it's about to create. And is this okay? Yes, hit enter. And notice this is the file that it creates. Okay, so you're creating a lab, you're doing a test, you're starting something from scratch. Where do I start? The answer is with the npm init command. Okay, fill in the blanks. This is an interactive prompt, and this will get you started. Now notice it created a main to run in index.mjs. This is kind of our entry point to our software. But okay, so now we've got a package JSON, which is where you start. Now we can begin installing dependencies. So I'm going to install Express. It's done right here with the npm iExpress command. Copy that to the clipboard. Go back to my command prompt, right click, npm iExpress. And notice it created a node modules folder. This is where all of the Express code goes, which look at all of these dependencies Express has. In order to use Express, Express uses a lot of other dependencies. So when I install Express, it put a whole bunch of stuff in here. Here's the good thing about node modules. You don't have to touch it. You really shouldn't have to touch node modules. But it is worth noting that if I kind of go back to the docs, somewhere on here, 16 files. This 16 files means that Express has other dependencies. That's what that means, right? And you can see that when you bring in Express. Now, this syntax here, using the require syntax, is not my preferred syntax. Let's open up the actual docs. And if I go to the getting started hello world. So even these docs are wanting me to use the require syntax. Of course, I don't want to do that. So the one line difference will be line number 1 from the documentation. Again, we're using the newer import syntax instead of the require syntax. And other than that, we can kind of take a look at the rest of this. And it's not going to be doing anything too crazy. Line 1 brings in, for line 1 to work, you have to have installed Express. You cannot import Express from Express if you haven't installed the dependency. Okay? Now, Express is a method, as you can see here. Line 2 creates the web application. So line 2 creates the, well, as you can see, Express application. So line 1 imports the method. Line 2 creates a variable. Line 3 declares a port. This is a route. Line 5 declares the default home route. Remember what I said before, where you're going to see request object and response object. This does look a little bit simpler than what we had to do before, where we had to say the content type was text, so on and so forth. Line 9 actually starts the app listening on port 3000. When you start the app, it's going to console log example app. Okay, let's start it. I'm going to hit Control S. I'm going to say node index MJS. It says example app listening on port 3000. Now, how do I navigate to it? I'm going to go to http://127.0.0.1. And it looks pretty similar, right? Nothing crazy here. It's the same thing. But now we're using Express instead of using just Node. And if you want to, hello world from Rankin Technical College. Okay. Now I made a change, but notice if I kind of go here, this should not actually represent my change. In order for that to happen, I need to close my app. You do that with Control C. Control C closes it, and then I have to rerun it. So anytime you change your source code here, notice what I had to do, close it and rerun it. Okay, that's annoying, by the way, as we're going to change our source code a lot, and I imagine you guys you could probably take a guess that would be annoying. Question, yes sir. One more time, what's your question? I can't hear you. How do you do it? Is that the question? Oh, other ways to do it. I'm going to show you a different way to do it. I'm going to show you the preferred way. Okay, so what have we demonstrated here? Let's just start from the top. Everyone kind of zone back in. Let's get these cell phones put in your pocket. Let's not have distractions with the cell phone. What have we done? Introduce NPM, right? The website, npmjs.org. We've demonstrated downloading a package. The package was Express. Once we downloaded Express, well, even before that, package JSON. What was the command to create package JSON? npm init, right? So we opened up an empty folder. We did npm init. npm init created a package JSON. Notice when I installed Express, I now have this new dependency right here. That did not exist. That did not exist until I installed Express. Now, the other command that was thrown out there, if I kind of back out here, how do I install Express? Well, it's the npm install, or npm I for short, right? So a couple of commands going back here. We know what npm init does. npm init creates our package JSON. npm install is going to install a dependency or install a package. A package is a bunch of JavaScript that someone else wrote. All right. Now there's also an npm install -g. Okay. Would everyone agree that anytime I change my source code, having to shut down the server and restart the server, that's an annoying process. Okay. There's another dependency. That can help with this process. That anytime you change your source code, it automatically reboots your web server. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to install this dependency globally so that it's available basically on my computer. I don't have to do it for every single website that I'm working on. Okay, so when I'm saying global, that's a computer-wide setting. All right, so I'm going to take you to your second package. The second package I'm going to introduce everyone to is called NodeMon. All right. NodeMon is a tool that helps develop Node applications by automatically restarting the Node application when the source code changes in the directories are detected. Okay. Now, NodeMon is a special package that we're going to install globally. And so let's look at the homepage of NodeMon and notice they give you a switch right there. npm install -g. So -g is a global, call that a switch. I don't know why they call it a switch, but it's always been called a switch. So npm install -g NodeMon is going to install, back to here, is going to install NodeMon globally, and then I'll demonstrate how to use NodeMon. So going back to my source code here, how do I stop this server from running? Yes?
About installing globally, is that like installing across our entire computer, or
Yeah,
just
on
from
your
this folder?
computer. Yep, on your computer. Good question. It is on the computer. So when I see this little block right here, I could tell that my app is still running on port 3000. What's the hotkey to stop my server from running? Control C. Okay, so now I'm back to this prompt right here. I'm going to paste in the npm install -g nodemon. Okay, and it kind of said remove some packages and change 29 packages in 2 seconds. By the way, I made a mistake. Notice how my package JSON is open. When you're installing dependencies, I prefer to have package JSON closed. But notice it did not list my dependencies here. It did not list nodemon here because it's not a, like a package dependency. It's a global dependency. Now I can run, instead of running node, I can run nodemon. You're probably going to hit an error on this, I believe. If I type in nodemon index.mjs, notice how this nodemon is now started. For those of you following along, did you guys hit an error? Yes?
Yeah.
Great. What does your error say?
Cannot load running scripts is disabled on the system.
Yep, cannot load running scripts is disabled on the system. I'm going to ask one of you to share your screen, and I'm going to show you how to fix this, because everyone's going to hit this error. So if one of you two would share your screen, and I want everyone to hop on to their screen share. Paul's, let's hop on to Paul's. So I'm going to pull this over here. What we're looking at is Paul's screen on my screen. Okay, it says nodemon cannot be loaded because running scripts is disabled on the system. Do you see that the link it gives you? https go.microsoft.com. Can you copy that? All right. Let's go ahead and open up a window. Now, can you drag that window down or share that window? Yeah, go ahead and change your settings there, please.
Right, this is the display.
Okay. Okay. Now, all right. This is just something you have to do one time, and everyone's going to have to do it. So, let's pay attention here. Paul, go ahead and scroll down. And execution policies. You could see all sign bypass, default, remote sign, restricted. Let's scroll down, undefined, unrestricted. Okay. So, this is a security thing here. We're running a script kind of globally. It's making sure that, this should be allowed on your machine because it's a little bit of a security thing here. Let's keep scrolling down, Paul. And okay, managing the execution policy with PowerShell. This is where we need to get. Okay. So there's a get execution policy. Keep scrolling. Okay, for example, the following command gets the execution policy for the current user. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Changing the execution policy. Now we're getting somewhere. To change your execution policy. Policy named. Okay, for example, set execution policy. There we go. Execution policy remote signed. So that looks like that might be in. Let's scroll down a little bit. Do you see that one right there? Set execution policy. Switch execution policy remote signed. Yeah, that's it. So let's go ahead and copy that. Or you can click that copy button. Okay, do me a favor and we're going to close Visual Studio altogether. Okay, and I want you to click Start and type in PowerShell, P-O-W-E-R. And I want you to right click and run as administrator. And then I want you to paste that command into the prompt. Okay, and I want you to hit enter. Okay, and it says basically yes to all. I'm going to hit A, yes to all. Okay, and now let's type in exit, enter. Okay, obviously I can help anyone with this, but basically you go to the website, you copy that command, you open up a PowerShell window, you run the command, you close the window. Now notice I had Paul close Visual Studio. I want Paul to reopen Visual Studio. And now I want you to type in nodemon. And he's going into the right directory. So nodemon, and his file is index.mjs there. And enter. And let's see what it does. Did you hit enter?
Yeah. No, you don't.
There it goes. It just took a second. Okay. So Paul just demonstrated now his nodemon is working. And so problem solved. Again, you just got to do this on any new machine that you're developing on. It's a security thing, and it's how you're going to have to run nodemon. Okay? So I'm going to stop watching Paul. Thank you, Paul. That allows this to, now let's demonstrate nodemon, because what is the benefit of nodemon? Well, right now, if I go to http://127 hello world from Rankin Technical College, 1 exclamation point. Now I'm going to change my source code. I'm going to put three more. I'm going to hit Control S. Watch my server reboot. As soon as I hit Control S, do you notice my server rebooted? Okay, what did I do here? I saved some keystrokes from having to stop my server and manually restart it. Okay, so during development, we use tools like nodemon that help us out here. And by the way, if I go back to finish out the demo, if I refresh this now, notice my exclamation points are already there. Yep.
There's like process managers. Like I used one called PM2. Does that have a functionality like this? Like it like runs your server outside of your terminal essentially?
I think that's a little bit different. I think so. This is just a tool used during development to save you some keystrokes and basically save you some time. But what are we doing when we're writing code? We're changing our source code all the time. So it's a pain in the butt to have to stop and restart your server all the time. So the first package that we learned is Express. Express is going to allow us to boot up a web server real quick, real easy. Okay. The second thing that we're learning is nodemon. Nodemon is a package that helps us out in our development environment. Now, in the end of the day, when we're really, deploying these apps onto Google Cloud, you're not running nodemon on Google Cloud. You're running the node command, on those servers. Okay, but nodemon is the development tool that we're using during development. And so back to let's close the unneeded windows here. Is everyone doing okay? It's a long lecture day. We're about halfway through. We surviving over here?
Yep.
This is being recorded. Yep. So the three parts of NPM. The website. We've seen the website. npm.js.com. The next part is the registry, aka database of packages. Okay, the registry is just all the available packages that you can download and install. Okay, the client is the command line tool. Okay, the npm install -g nodemon. So -g is a global switch. There's another switch on here, is -d, or also what's referred to as save dev. So let's go here and look up JSLint. Not that one. See how the weekly downloads is 8? Let's look up the JSLint that was second. In the list, JSLint Lite.
Yeah, someone got 3.
Yep. So let's go here. Let's just search for the word lint.
I think I saw like another version near the middle.
JSLint Node.
Yeah,
Because it's a popular package, you could see that.
I mean, the one I have at 12,000.
Yeah, let's see. All right, so here's where I'm going to go to a Google search. I'm going to search for popular. Okay, most
You're not looking for ES1?
ESLint, thank you. Most popular npm packages. Now these are just, people compile their own list of what popular packages is. I would like to just use like recent statistics. I'm sure you could Google search this a little bit differently and find like ranking in order, descending order by downloads, weekly downloads, what are the most popular packages. And so number 1, on this list is Express. We're going to be using Axios, Lodash. We'll be using a similar tool to Mongoose. But yeah, let's go back to the original problem. JSLint. I think I was getting that confused with the extension ESLint. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, ESLint. What is a linter? A linter is compile time help with your JavaScript code. And so a linter will help you, find the red squigglies if you're making a mistake in JavaScript before you run it. And so a linter, again, helps you write JavaScript code. And if we go find and fix problems in your JavaScript code, and here is the, let's click on Get Started. And here is one way of bringing it in. You can install and configure ESLint using this command. And so we can go through this quickly, because what it's going to do, if I go back here, if I stop my server from running, I run the install command, and you can see this is again interactive. I can answer these questions by using my arrow keys. Check syntax and find problems. Let's just do check syntax only. I'm going to be doing JavaScript modules, import and export. I will wind up using React. Do you use TypeScript? Yes or no? At the end of the day, we're going to be running our code in the browser. And would you like to install them now? Yes. Which package manager do you use? We use npm. And here's a separate lint config file that was created. Very similar. It was an init command that created a config file, just like the npm init command. Let's see if I do. It did ultimately the same thing. I just want to point this out. Express was a dependency on my package. The dev dependencies, these are packages that are only going to go on my local machine. So there is a difference between the dependencies and the dev dependencies. I kind of go back here. Anytime you do the npm install with a /d, that dependency will be a dev dependency. Again, the difference between a dev dependency and a regular dependency is that the dev dependency is only on your machine. If you put your source code on any other machine, aka Google Cloud, the dev dependencies don't follow you. The other dependencies do follow your source code. Okay, so that's the switch D. Now I didn't demonstrate the switch D the way it's here on the docs, but I got there using this command. There are other dependencies that you will do a switch D or save dev on, but a linter is one that I commonly demonstrate that with. Okay, popular npm packages. Okay, close NodeMon. If you ever accidentally install a dependency and you want to uninstall it, there is an npm uninstall command. So let's go back and I'll just, real quickly, I'll install, like maybe I accidentally install this guy here. All you have to do is change the I to an uninstall. Right, so it's real simple to uninstall a dependency. So if I install this, okay, I look at my package JSON. Now there's that dependency. And it's like, oops, didn't mean to do that. Real simple. I'm going to change that I to an uninstall. Again, I like to close my package JSON, reopen it, and notice it removed it. Okay, so there is an uninstall command that I just demonstrated. And let's see, I've demonstrated NodeMon. A few other packages, I will bring these in as we do a little bit more. Okay, we've talked about that. We've talked about what is a web server. We've talked about what is a web client. We've gone through installing Express. We could update this code with the new syntax. So what I could do here is just take a snip right here of this import syntax instead of. So here's hello world. Okay. Why don't we take another 10 minutes and then we're going to come back and talk about routing. Okay, let's take another 10-minute break. Okay, I wanted to point out, if I would have scrolled a little bit more in the docs, that here's the command that I was ultimately looking for, the save dev command, switch as you would call it, on an npm install save dev ESLint. And then but the reason why I did something a little bit different is then after you run this command, then you have to run your config file and create the config file separately. So these two commands were all bundled into the way that I did it under this npm init ESLint config at latest. So those two commands were bundled into one, and just to show that if I would have scrolled down through the docs a little bit more, and then to run the linter on your file, you'd run the npx command. Npx, and you might remember seeing npx last semester, depending on some of the things that you installed, is an executor. So it not only does it download a dependency, but it also kind of runs it. So it kind of does two things in one. Whereas npm I, you see, just downloads the dependency. npx does a download and an execution of some code. So npx is a little bit different there. I ran npx ESLint on my file, and because I said I'm writing React here, I'm not writing React. I just got this warning on my file. Nonetheless, it ran the linter on me like I asked it to. There's another npx that's kind of a fun. So there's another fun little dependency, completely silly. It's called cowsay, npx cowsay hello students. You could see it downloaded a dependency and it executed the dependency, which is completely pointless, a cow saying hello students. It's a simple example of the npx command, which not only downloads the dependency, but it also executes the dependency. Right? That's going to be the difference between the npm command and the npx command. Another very popular dependency that you guys have used is Vite. You guys remember Vite? Let's click Get Started using Vite. And this is an npm command. But as you guys might remember, Vite is going to install a front end. So if I run npm create Vite at latest, it's going to create a project front end. Hello. You need me?
Yeah, for a second.
Okay. I'll be right with you. The front end is React. So I'm going to choose React. I'm going to choose JavaScript. I'm going to see it brought in React here. So I'm going to follow these three commands now that I've installed it. I'm going to cd front end. I'm going to do npm install to install the dependencies there. And then I'm going to do a run dev just to show you guys how to have a back end and a front end. Right now my back end is right here. Okay? And the front end is in this front end folder. Now we've got a back end and a front end in one project. And you saw the command back there. It was npm run dev. npm run dev. It boots up a React site on the front end. Okay, so hang tight for me for 1 minute. Okay, so now we've got a React front end and we've got an Express back end. Yes. Scroll up a little bit. Yeah, here. Yep.
Could you scroll a bit more and see?
Sure. Yeah. The command that I used was npm create Vite at latest. I want to talk just for a minute a little bit about routes. And so we've got back-end routes and we've got front-end routes. These back-end routes, notice this is a route. This is kind of the default route. Default route. I would call this the default back-end route. So when I hit the default back-end route, it just sends some text. When I hit my front-end route, you kind of saw localhost 5173, so you can see the port's different. You can see this responded with some HTML. We got HTML heading. We've got a little image here. Okay, we've got a fave icon. Okay, so the most common question I kind of start getting at this point, and maybe we're not quite there yet, is, Mr. G, what's the difference between a back-end route and a front-end route? Okay, and the answer is typically a front-end route is going to respond with some sort of HTML, CSS, and some sort of like vanilla JavaScript, maybe does some form validation, that kind of stuff. Whereas a back-end route, typically these back-end routes, you're going to start working with other resources besides HTML. Typically back-end routes, you might start working with like databases, for example. So it's common for a front-end route to use a back-end route. So like your web page, your HTML will call on the back-end route to get some information out of the database and display it in the front end. Okay, but I think it gets confusing because there's kind of two routes. This is a route. This is a back-end route. And ultimately, you know, these back-end routes provide access to resources. And then there's also front-end routes. And front-end routes provide access to different resources. So, you know, to point out those differences there, yeah.
I like a side question. I would say it's kind of related.
Sure.
So, in the process of creating an application, kind of the flow of it, would it be like, okay, the team get together and make the backend first?
Good question.
Okay.
Good question. So the question is like, hey, do we create the back end first and then we create the front end? Or is it more like this where you're doing it all at once? And the answer is it depends on the company. Okay, so the way you think of it, they call it slicing. And so think of it as the database, that's one layer. Okay, the application is another layer. And then the front end is another layer. So you kind of like got a cake, you know? And so do you do horizontal slicing, meaning you just do the whole database all at once? And then you code all the application all at once, horizontal slicing. And then you code the front end all at once, right? So you're going horizontally through the stacks, okay? Or do you do vertical slicing? Vertical slicing is database, application, front end, get one thing working on all of them together, okay? So it's a really good question because everyone does it differently. Every company does it differently. Where I've landed is to do vertical slicing. I like vertical slicing. Getting the back end, the database, the front end, all working together for one little piece and then adding to it and then adding to it. I like vertical slicing. I think you should do vertical slicing until it doesn't make sense anymore for your application. And so, good question. And the answer is it depends on the company. And those are the basic two kind of approaches: vertical slicing versus horizontal slicing. Yeah.
So if you are doing that vertical slicing, which you're talking about, you have to make sure like everything's way planned out ahead of time, or can you just kind of like add chunks?
Yeah. So software development today is very much time to market and like get a feature, get it live, get it working. And that's why I kind of like the vertical slicing. It's like just get it out there, get it live. And in fact, I went back and I listened to that podcast I recommended you guys last week about the JavaScript developer. And like that was his whole thing. Like time to market, gotta go. This internet thing, network effects. If you know what network effects are, get everyone on board, get them using it, and we'll make improvements later. You know, you guys play video games like that, right? They just,
Patches.
yeah, they get the game out there, get people to buy it, get the money in the bank, secure the bag, and then fix it later on.
Well, that's like, isn't that like one of the downsides to it though? Is 'cause I remember there was like some coding YouTuber I was watching. He was talking about how like it doesn't matter how perfect and awesome your application is. The user experiences one error, one bug, they think it's crap, and they throw it out.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but that's the world that we live in today, right? I mean, I remember like I grew up playing GoldenEye, which was like a perfect game, all in one cartridge, and like there was no patches on GoldenEye. It was in the cartridge, you know. So those developers, I mean, they were so thorough and they tested everything, and everything was, you know, everything was just so clean. And nowadays, that's just not how software is built. It's about making money, getting it quick. Yeah, the perception is by the end user not going to be as clean. I would agree with that.
I think a big conception that changed though between like the time of Golden Age and now is that we now have the capability of loading patches to something over the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So
it
you
gives us
can.
that feature.
Yeah, that used to not be available. Used to not be a thing. And there's more to say about that, but yeah, I'm glad you guys are asking those questions. Yeah.
Kind of reverting back to my question. So like, I believe there are like teams. So unless we land a job as a junior full stack developer, we will only be focusing on one certain aspect of the process. Right?
Yeah. So if you go work for a big company, yeah, I mean, the database team might be 30 database developers, and you're just focused on the database. You know, if you work for a smaller company, you're going to wear multiple hats. You know, so it depends on the company you work for. I think I hate giving the answer. It depends, but it depends. You know. Thank you for the questions. Okay. Now, if I hit Control C, that's going to stop my front end application from running. And notice I'm in a front end folder. So a couple commands that you should be familiar with in the command prompt. CD. Okay, change directory. When you do CD ... that means go up a directory, right? So notice I literally navigated up one directory in the folder structure. But if I do CD front end, and notice I just hit tab, I start typing in the word front, and I hit tab, and so it put the root / in front of me. That navigates down a directory. So very simply, CD ... goes up a directory, CD, and then type the name of the folder, goes down a directory. Okay, so being able to traverse your folder structure up and down at the command prompt. CLS is to clear the screen. CLS kind of cleans up the gunkiness there. Okay, and remember now here, to run your front end code is npm run dev. Okay, that's the script. So this, like up until now, we've been running npm install. But now we have this npm run command. And that kind of came out of nowhere when we start using npm run. npm install or npm run. Let me show you what npm run is. If I go into my front end folder, notice it has its own package JSON. Let me open up my front end package. This is my back end package JSON. Let me open up my front end package JSON. Notice on scripts, it's got this dev command, which just runs this vite, just runs this. This was kind of built in. So the npm run, there's another one called build. So I could do npm run build. All right, let me show you what npm run build does on my front end. If I stop this from running, clear the screen, npm run build. What this does, it says building for production. Notice it created these files. It created a dist folder. This dist folder was not here before. This dist folder has my assets, including my index.html. So it created these files. So npm run build created some static files for deployment, like to actually get this site ready for deployment. Okay, so npm install is one command. npm run is going to run this script. Now let me show you why I'm showing you npm run. We're going to create our own script on the back end. What was the package that we liked that'll reboot our server? Node.mon. Okay. So let's go into here. You guys are following along. I'm going to put a comma. I'm going to create my own script. So npm run, and what do I want to call this? I'll call it start dev, colon. I'm going to run the node.mon command. This is giving me a bunch of suggestions. If I kind of break this down, this is more than I need. But if you say node.mon watch any extension, MJS or JS or JSON, I don't think this is what I actually want to do. But here's what I did. I created a script. When I run this script, it runs my node.mon command on the index.mjs file. Okay, so instead of having to type in node.mon, oh, I got to get out of my front end, cd ... puts me in my root. If I say node.mon index.mjs, that runs node.mon. This is what node.mon looks like. Now I've created another script. We can run a script with npm run start dev. And ultimately what it does is it runs this node.mon command. But it's tick for tat. I just created a script called start dev. Start dev runs node.mon. I'll create another script called maybe the dev script, which will run node. To be honest, I don't even know what all of this stuff is doing here, but that's the gist of it. One of my scripts runs a node, which is more production. Another script is more of a development script that'll run node.mon. So if I save this, now anytime you change package JSON, look, okay, it rebooted. Let me control C. Now I've got two scripts, npm run dev. Okay, this is running the node command. Or I can do npm run start dev. And that runs node.mon. Okay, so that's creating scripts. And one more thing while I'm in package JSON. Yeah, I like the MJS files, but I don't like having to type MJS. I'm going to do, if I change this type to module, if I change this type attribute in my package JSON, I no longer have to name everything MJS. I could just start calling it .js. So if I change the type to module, I can change all of my file extensions from MJS to .js, because that's better, right? And now, if I close this down, clear the screen, let me run my start dev script. And I don't know if it liked my start. Let me before I do my scripts, let me just do node index.js. See, something's hosed up. Node index. Oh, I have to actually change my file extension. Node index.js. There we go. Now, node index.js. Okay? And because if we didn't do that, changing the type to module, we would not be able to use modules as we are here using the import statement without the MJS. Okay, so you will very commonly seeing me change the type to module. That'll save that step. Okay, package JSON. You see, we come in here and we change package JSON, and we make changes to it. Package lock JSON, we don't touch. The difference being these, they touch on like the versions, which these little carets on these versions of the dependencies mean like what can be updated and what cannot. So let me rewind here. All of our packages can get updated, right? Someone else wrote this code, and so on break someone says, I don't know that I like this world because we're depending so much on other developers. And that is the downfall. If you like to write everything from scratch, if you're using Express, which we are, it's literally in the stack, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. Express gets updated. When was the last time Express was updated? I think it said 5 months ago. So maybe next month, Express releases an update. So these little carets in here represent that, what can be updated. So you got major version, minor version, and then patch. And so here is an explanation on your Learn Node reading. If you write 0.13.0, you want to get updates that do not change the major version. So that little caret there means do not change my major version. So if you write 1.13.0, you can get minor releases and patches all the way up to version 2, but you're not going to update that major version from 1 to 2. Right? Does everyone... Let's even rewind this a little bit. This versioning system, you've got major, minor, and patch. Major versions typically incorporate breaking changes. So if you go from major version 1 to major version 2, you can't easily go from 1 to 2 without something breaking. Minor version, this is going to be like new features, right? But they're not breaking changes. Like you're adding features to your code base. And then patches are going to be bug fixes and security enhancements and performance enhancements and things of that nature. So major, minor, patches. Most of the time you just see this. Like if I look at my package JSON, like you see a lot of these carets. This caret means keep version 4 and then you can update the 19 and the 2. Right? So a lot of times that's what you see. But I think the TLDR on this is that you can modify package JSON, but you do not touch package lock JSON. Is the short version. And then they got the squiggly. So if you write 0.13.0, you only want to get updates for the patch releases. Meaning 13.1 is okay, but 14.0 is not. So you can see you're only allowed to update the last number. And if you write exactly the number, that is the exact version that will always be used. So as these new features get released, what do you want? Do I want to allow in my package JSON, do I want Express 20? If I were to update Express, if I were to do like an npm I Express again, there is an update command to update all your dependencies. Does it go to 1420 when it gets released or not? The way it's currently written, yes, it's okay. Whoops. Okay. Back to our Express. All right. Express middleware is a whole nother conversation for another day. Because we've been lecturing for a long time. I'm going to make another route on my Express. Again, these are backend routes. So I want to show you this. So this is the default backend route. Default meaning it's just / When I go to the root, let me make another route. I'm going to write an app.get, about, request object, response object, arrow function. You can kind of see the syntax from the method above. And I'm going to send back a different piece of text. Now I've got two backend routes. Maybe I've got an array of students. Let's change this to /students. And I'm going to say const students. Let me just put in my array of students. All right, I've got an array of student objects, John Doe and Jane Doe. And on my res.send, I'm going to send back my array. So again, front-end routes typically serve up HTML files, but this back-end route, which is not a default back-end route, this route here will get all of my students. If I navigate to /students, so if I say nodemon, index.js, okay, we've started up my backend server, and if I hit my home route, I'll go to http:// port 3000, and I got something funny. Okay, hold on.
I think you put student.
I put the wrong thing here. Whoops, do you see what I did there?
Yeah.
My home route sends back the students. So let me cut this, paste it in /students, and this res.send hello world. Okay, let me reboot, bring it back. I'm like, what is going on? Now /students responds with my students array to my front end. Home route here, /students gives me this. Backend routes provide access to resources. What is our resources? Our resources, in this case, are our list of students. I could, on my HTML, on my front end, I could call this backend route to get my array of students and then put each student in a Bootstrap card with their image and their student name and put it into an HTML file. Right? So backend routes provide access to resources. Front-end routes just give you your HTML. Now it is pretty normal when I load up the home page, I kind of want my default backend route to serve up. I'm going to show this little trick. I want my default backend route to serve up a front end resource. So let me show you how you could do this. This is an example of middleware. Okay, so let's condense this. Here's my array of students. Here's my 2 routes. I'm going to write a middleware function to serve the static files from the React app. Middleware is a fancy term for a method that runs in between the response and the request. And so this is just a function call that happens. We see on my front end, I've got a dist folder with an index.html file. So I'm going to serve up this index.html file. In fact, you guys remember, let me close this down a little bit. Clear the screen. Let me remember app.jsx. Here's a little bit of HTML. Everyone remember is HTML, yeah? So I'm just going to come into here and I'm just going to change this HTML to say hello from my React front end. Okay, we're no longer using this hook. We're no longer using any of this. Okay, so I'm just changing my front end a little bit. And npm run build, I believe, was going to kind of recompile my front end assets into index.js. Okay, good. So now if I run this, if I go npm run dev, I should just see the updated hello from my React front end. Okay, so let me close that. And I want my backend to serve this front end file just on the home route. So this is done with app.use express.static front end dash dist folder. That run build command would generate your dist folder. So that run build command, CLS, this command right here, npm run build, that'll generate your dist folder. So now if I go back and I do an npm run, I think start dev is my nodemon script. Okay, and so that kind of gets my backend running. And I go to my home route. Notice my backend route serves up my front end route. So again, this is just kind of the direction we're going to do some of that, as Henry was asking about vertical slicing, where you got backend routes and front end routes all working together. And still, if I go to the /students, okay, so this is serving up my students array, and there's my hello for my React front end. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is it supposed to be at 43,000, right? For your local?
Yeah, for the back end, yeah. I've got HTTP port 3000. There you go.
Where did you copy the HTML that you took from the app.jsx?
Yeah, so if I, in the React front-end folder, there was a source folder and then app.jsx. This is the only HTML that I changed. This was in that component, the app component in my React front end. Okay? And if you're like, oh my gosh, I did React, but I do not remember React, it's okay. Like, that's what this class is about. We're going to learn React from the ground up in this class. Okay, so I know I'm just kind of throwing you in the deep end here, but that's, you know, we're just touching it, right? We're not being tested on it yet. You know what I mean? This is an example of a middleware function that performs some logic for us. It performs a behavior for us, which is serves up our dist folder to be used for the home route. And notice I still have a home route, and it doesn't send hello world. Instead, it uses, like, I can delete this now. Okay, let's look at the different methods that HTTP has built in. Yes?
One question about middleware. Would that be classified as middle tier?
I don't know about middle tier, but I would say middleware is any function that runs in between the client request and the server response. Okay, that's how you could think of it. It's just functions that run in between request response.
And is the Node stuff classified as middle? Still front.
Yeah, so Node is going to be for your backend. Yeah.
Node's backend.
So backend, you can think of the application and the database both as backend technologies.
Okay.
So the application is considered backend. The database is also considered backend. Sometimes you would call the application middle tier, and that's also true. So it just depends on who you talk to. Sometimes, I know what you're saying, like middle tier, the application is the middle, the database is the back,
Right.
the HTML is the front. That's your 3-tier architecture. Sometimes the application just gets lumped into the back end
Right.
as people.
Because users don't see it.
Exactly. Anything that they don't see is the back end. Yeah. So I think it just depends on who you're talking to and that kind of thing.
Right.
Normally when I think HTML, I just think like client facing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Anything that the client would receive.
Yeah.
UX UI.
Yeah. Yeah. UX UI. Okay. So routing. This idea of routing is the path to get to a resource. Middleware is this idea that any function that runs in between the request and the response. And then the view is your front end. And so we're using React, so we're not going to use the template engine that's built into Express for the view. So there's hello world. Okay. Where was I going to go? Oh yeah, HTTP methods. And let's go to the MDM web docs. So HTTP is the protocol where a client can request something. A client can request something, they're going to issue a GET method. So when your browser says, I want an image, the browser is going to send a GET request to a server. But then you ever click a submit button to buy something? That's going to be a post. Do you guys remember coding HTML forms? And do you remember when you click that submit button, that is a post request. So a post request is typically like new information coming into the server. So there's a GET request, which is like requesting something from the client. And then there's a post request, which is like new information coming in. It might be a client order. It might be a new user of your website, filling out the registration form. It might be a user searching for a song on Spotify, right? It might be a user uploading their image to Facebook. Those are all post requests. So, remember CRUD operations? Yeah, that's what we're looking at here.
It's the update.
Yeah. The post is the create. Create something new. Create something new. The get is the read operation. The put is going to be your update. Now, actually, it's interesting you said that, because a post could sometimes, there's a little bit of a debate. Some people would argue, and I don't subscribe to one answer here. Some people would argue that an update could be a post. Like, hey, I'm already a customer. I'm just going to update my last name because I got married or whatever. That could be a post request, but put is typically going to be your update, and then your delete method obviously is your delete in the CRUD, right? So let's CRUD translates to these HTTP methods. Get is read, post is create, put is update, delete is delete. Okay.
So, with the HTTP request methods, puts would be the equivalent of the set in C#.
Set in C#. So, dot set C#. Set. Oh, you're thinking of like setters and getters. You're thinking of getters and setters. A set could be new, or a set could be an update. So it could be viewed like that. It could be viewed like that. Back to Express. Everyone, kind of get with me here. Notice line 19 is app.get. What do you think the get is? That's your HTTP method. So when a client is asking for a resource, it's issuing a GET request. But what if I wanted to create a new student?
What do you do?
Post.
App.post. So if I post to /students, maybe I just say students created. Now, wait a minute, I got a students array. How could I add a new student onto my array? Push. Yeah. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you how to accept this from the user, but let's just make a new student equals, and then I'll just say student 3 or whatever.
So you're basically just making a constructor.
Yeah, we're gonna create a little new student here with a object initializer kind of thing, right? So here's our new student, and I'm gonna say students.push new students, and let me send back my res.send student added success. I'm just gonna send a message back that student added successfully. Something like this. So if I do a post to my students route, then I'm just going to basically get the ID and say, okay, we've got a new student ID. Actually, I don't even know if my students up here have an ID. Okay, they do. So this ID should go to number 3, and then the name of the new student, and then the age. Now, in the real world, obviously, you're going to save this in a database, and obviously you're getting input from the user and all these kinds of things. This is day number 1 almost, you know what I mean? So we're going to get there. We're not there right now. But check this out. Does everyone see? Well, if I go to HTTP here, and if I go to /students, this is a GET request, right? But how would I post? I need a web page to do a post.
You need a way to submit information.
yeah, you need a way to submit information. So either I could code up a web page to actually do a post, but introduce new tool called, the literal name of the tool is called Postman, right? Feel free, you guys just go ahead and, Google search Postman, and let's get you downloading Postman, because we're gonna use Postman as a browser on steroids. Postman is going to allow us to test our routes in Express without having to mock up a web page, without having to mock up a front end. So let me show you how to use Postman real quickly. And we're going to do all of this again tomorrow, so don't worry. If you're feeling like bombarded with long lectures, I need to sign into Postman. You guys will have to create an account on Postman. It's free. Whatever, postman.com. Let's see. Hopefully my credentials are cached. Hopefully I can sign in.
Should we use our school emails for it?
You can use personal or school. It's really up to you. You might even use personal because that'll stay with you after you graduate. You know what I mean? So Postman is this tool that we can simulate a front end, a browser, without actually having to code up a web form and a post button and all this kind of stuff. So you guys don't have to follow along with me right now, but if I can get your eyes on my screen just to kind of show you, you got like all these folders here, and I'm going to generate like a new collection, a blank collection, and this is just a folder, right? This is just a folder, so I'm going to say Express Hello World, okay? And I'm going to generate a request that's part of my collection. And this is going to be look right here, you can change all your methods. Without having to create a front-end web page, I can just create a post request that's going to go to http://localhost, I think we were on port 3000, / what is it, students?
/ students.
Is it plural or singular?
I think it's plural.
Plural. Okay, so let me do / students. Okay, now if I do a GET request, check this out. I'm just going to do a GET request. Okay, and notice I received my students. And if I change that to my post request, it should run my post method on the back end. And it does say student added successfully. If I change it back to a GET request, you now see my new student added to my array. Okay, so how much quicker was that than me having to code up an HTML form and change up all this and that? It's a lot faster. Yeah.
Just a quick way to validate your code.
Yeah, it's
Make sure it works.
exactly your back-end code. So this is a testing tool for your back-end routes. Okay, and we can do all the methods. We can do gets and posts and puts and deletes. And the things I don't do a whole lot of is patching and head and options. I don't know that I've ever touched those, but they're there should you dive deeper than I do. Okay? So Postman's a great tool. We're going to use it a ton tomorrow. If all you're doing today is watching me and maybe downloading the tool and registering for an account, that's all you really got to do today. Okay? And what happens if I post another student? Let's see if I go post here. Okay, and I change it back to a get. Well, there you go. I got a new student ID of 4. Same age and all that kind of jazz.
Should I use my Rankin email for this?
Use your personal. It's fine. You can use your personal. So looking at my notes for the lecture on Express, pretty well covered everything up until the live coding, which is kind of what I've transitioned this to, is a little bit more of live coding. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to do this kind of over. I'm just going to do it from scratch, and you guys are going to code along if you so choose tomorrow. Okay, but you know, there's going to be new information tomorrow as well in this live coding demo. So I just figured I'd knock some of it out here, introducing Postman. But notice I'm at the end of my Express lecture outline. You know, so I've covered everything that I need to cover. But I did want to kind of cover this reading data from the request. Remember, the client makes the request and the server sends a response. So when I go back to my routes, we've got a request object and we've got a response. And I kind of look at what I'm doing here on line 31. I'm using the response object to send a string back to the client. But information that comes in from the client is going to be in the other object, in the request object. So again, two objects, request and response. Request comes from the client, and then response is from the server back to the client, like server to the client. So client to the server or server to the client. And so, you know, when this is actually more realistic, we're going to be receiving like information inside of this request object. Like maybe our new student here that we're posting a new student, maybe instead of saying new student, like maybe we get this from a form, like with a text box that the user puts their first name, right? And see a couple people nodding their heads saying that makes sense. So in order to do that, we might have like a variable, say const first, or maybe we'll just say const student name equals maybe something like that, rec.body.name. Now, in order to do this, you know, there's a couple of ways to do this, but there's variables that you can have as part of your routes. So I could put some data as part of the route, or if I just have the user fill out the form, that's a different way of sending data, right? So route variables kind of look like this. So when I'm looking at my route, I would do /students : student name. And then the way to read that into a variable would be something like const student name equals, and then it would be rec.params that student name. That's no longer there. So this is a parameter variable, therefore rec.params means pull it from the parameter variable named student name. And I think there's actually one more, I haven't talked about, one more line. I don't think this is going to work yet out of the box. But then I would just replace name with my variable student name here. Okay, this would just allow me to pass the student name as part of the route. And passing data as part of the route is something that we will do. Okay, so I don't know if this is a good example, but nonetheless, it's like a variable up in the route, and then we use that. And in fact, what I could maybe do here is console log the student name to see if student name is actually being read properly, okay, when I post. Okay, so now let me go back to Postman. I'm going to do a post request, and I'm just going to put my name in here, /student/Evan. And if I send that, okay, it does say student added successfully. If I go back here, oh, it read my name to the console. So that's good. So I did read the parameter variable called student name. And if I go back and I see your hand, so let me just show this. If I do a get request, now, I'm going to delete that. And now Evan is in my name. Right? So now we're going to get that variability. If I go back to my post and John, and I post it, says student added successfully. And if I go back here, notice it's reading John. And was there a question? You figured it out? Okay. So this is how to have variables as part of your routes. And that's how to read out of the URL into a variable, and then use that variable in your object. Push the new student onto the array, and just give a success message. All right. So I think I'm going to stop the lecture here. Again, more to come tomorrow. But I'll stop here and put you guys to work for the last 30 minutes or so.